Thank you, my president and my soror, Sharon Case Williams, for that lovely introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat. We are excited and filled with exuberance of the conversation that we are getting ready to have on this evening. We have an esteemed panel of experts in various fields that's going to be able to give us guidance, knowledge, inspiration, and information that we're going to find invaluable and how to move forward in such a time as this. And so first, we're just going to jump right into it. I'd like to introduce them to you. The first of our guests is the esteemed one and only Mrs. Shavon Arline Bradley, Solutions, LLC, executive leadership firm. She is also a co-founder of the Health Equity Cipher Group, a collaborative of nationally recognized health equity experts designed to expand the work of health, equity, and diversity and inclusion in all sectors. She recently transitioned from the Office of the United States Surgeon General, where she serves as the Director of External Engagement and Senior Advisor. She managed all congressional, corporate, nonprofit, and advocacy organizational relationships. And if that is not enough, she has over 17 years of experiences in various areas, including policy, advocacy, board relations, social justice, community and stakeholder collaborative relationship building. She is also a co-author. She's co-authored the book, The Queen's Legacy, which exhibits a journey of the trials and triumphs of phenomenal women. I'm not done. She's also an ordained minister. She sits on the advisory board of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology as the youngest member. And she is a proud wife, married to Andrew Bradley, and mother of 4-year-old Micah and 18-year-old Amira. And finally, she is my beloved soror of one of the best organizations in this country, if not the best, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Welcome, Mrs. Shavon Arline Bradley. Next, we have the one and only Karen Boykin-Towns. Mrs. Boykin-Towns currently serves as president and CEO of Encore Strategies, LLC. She was also recently elected as vice chairman of the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People Board of Directors, which is the oldest and largest nonpartisan civil rights organization that was established in 1909. She has a career that spans 22 years at Pfizer, where she advanced quickly into executive management. She has been a senior legislative analyst. She has a huge reputation for success in state government. She's held very key leadership roles in public affairs, government relations, global policies, and human resources. In 2008, she was selected by Pfizer's CEO to serve as its first Chief Diversity Officer. In this role, she successfully developed an integrated global strategy, resulting in internal progress and an external recognition of the company's advances in diversity and inclusion as a competitive advantage. Not only that, she has a love and passion for policy and politics. In her early career, she served as a legislative director and then chief of staff to the New York State Senator David Paterson, who later became our 55th governor in New York. In that role, she led various initiatives, including strategies and executions of legislative efforts related to civil and human rights, community development, and environmental issues. She holds an MBA degree from the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College of the City University of New York. She is also very busy. She is the esteemed wife of our former Assemblyman, Daryl C. Towns, and she resides in Brooklyn, New York with their school. No, they're not school-age children anymore, right? They're older. But she's also a mother as well. So she is very busy. And last but certainly not least, we have the icon, the living legend, Dr. Hazel N. Dukes, who currently is the president of the NAACP, and she's also a member of the NAACP National Board of Directors. Her dedication to human rights and equality causes. Dr. Dukes is president of the Hazel N. Dukes and Associates consultant firm, where she specializes in the areas of public policy, health, and diversity. Dr. Dukes has over 50 years experience in civil and human rights. She is a knowledge that can be unsurpassed and a wisdom that we will be gleaning from tonight. She is a recipient of numerous awards that exemplify her outstanding leadership abilities and activities, including the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, the YWCA City of New York John Lafarge Memorial Award for Interracial Justice, the Guy R. Brewer Humanitarian Award, and the 2007 Network Journal's 25 Most Influential Black Women in Business Award. She was incorporated in 2007 as a Pi Eta Kappa Fellow, and her biography has been selected for publication in many journals and directories, including Fisk University Library, the Minority Women Contribution, the American Bibliographical Institute Personalities of the Northeast, and Who's Who Among American Women, and Who's Who Among Black Women. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our esteemed panelists. Let's just give them air applause. And we are excited. And so we're just gonna jump right in. And I'm gonna pose this question to all of our panelists. One of our most important discussions that the communities are engaged in currently is the census. And it's my understanding that in New York State, we do have a lack of representation in the census in our reporting. Can you just speak to the importance of us taking this initiative seriously and the impact if we do not have accurate representation for our state? I'll pose this question first to Dr. Dukes.
But to my esteemed Sorors and to my godchildren, Shavon and Karen, what an honor it is to be on with them as I've seen them grow up and beyond my wildest expectation for what they're doing. Let me just say, it's not just representation. We complain when our garbage is not picked up. We complain about our school budgets. All of this is centered around census. Yes, representation at our local level, in legislative body, and especially at the federal. It is said if we do not get our count up, we can lose 2 congressional seats this coming, and for 10 years, we will have lost 2 seats. We can't afford that. But the mere fact that census touch our very life, every day, healthy life that we need to have in our communities. And so it's only 10 questions. It only takes 3 minutes to fill out the census form. I've tried it every way. And we must encourage the NAACP this week will be making over 14,000 calls throughout New York. Our civic engagement chair, Hazel Coles, have received money to deal with a vendor that will have robot calls. I will be making most of the robot calls into our communities across the state. It is urgent for all who are listening, become an ambassador with us tonight to make sure that when we are through that you call at least 5 people to ask how they feel about their census form. It's easy. You can do it by mail, you can do it by phone, you can do it by your technology. But we must do this. It's about our life. Our life depends on the census, how we are counted and how we are viewed. And one other plug I want to put in here. Please say that you are Black. If you're from the West Indies, please don't put that there. You are Black now. That's what they count in America. That's what they're counting in the census. They're counting nationalities. So let's go back to our culture, be whatever we want to be, but on the census, please be Black.
Thank you, Dr. Dukes. Mrs. Bradley?
Try this. Oh, there we go. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much to our Sorors of the Albany Alumni Chapter, to our president, to our moderator, and to Sarah Helen. Thank you so much for pulling all this together. And it is an honor. She said we are godchildren, and she is right. Our Soror, Hazel and Dukes, and to our sister, Greek sister Karen, it's an honor to be on the line with 2 women that have been transformative in my life. I will say, in reference to census, I want to speak to you all as it relates to Delta Sigma Theta, and giving you greetings on behalf of our national president, Beverly Evans Smith, the census has been and continues to be one of Delta's primary focus areas. Contextually with what Soror Dukes was saying, though, I want to add to that. This conversation around representation really speaks to these long-term determinants of quality of life for all citizens in this country. Particularly Black Americans, though, are struggling in areas around access to transportation, access to healthcare, access to education. The census specifically is about two things: money and power. And money speaks to the investments that'll be made into those agencies, into these congressional districts that we all are members and constituents of. If we do not fill out the census, if we do not complete the forms, if we do not ensure our seniors, our college students, our little children are counted in these spaces, then the funds that are intended to be allocated to your congressional district will go elsewhere where people fill out the census. That's the first thing. The second thing is the power. What I want you to understand, Sorors and friends that are on the line, this is also around congressional power and the Electoral College. Now, we are nonpartisan, but we are factual around politics. And so this idea of understanding how the Electoral College works is that the number of delegates is aligned with the census. So again, the larger your congressional district, the more representation that you have. The last thing I will say, and I'm really glad that Soror Dukes talked about checking Black, because there is something to be said around populations and around population representation. Because there are so many communities in this country, and that's what we honor. We honor the diversity of America, but particularly for the Black community, looking at political power, political context, Delta Sigma Theta is an organization that has a focus on the constructive members, the development of our members, but also around the Black community's expansion. And the advancement of our community is why our partnership with the NAACP is so important. We want to build political power. And in building political power, that allows us to be able to make decisions for our communities by members of our community. So it's very important to align in this space.
Thank you for that response. Now, Mrs. Boykin-Towns, I know as a proud member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, you have some thoughts in this area as well.
Absolutely. And first, I'd like to personally thank President Williams for this invitation, and certainly my sister girlfriend, Helen Hicks, who reached out, and you cannot believe just what an honor it is to be on this panel with, you know, my second mom and my other sister. We work very closely together within the NAACP, and although it was not said, you should know that Shavon is also vice chair of our National Health Committee. She was the director of our National Health Committee before she went on and did some more amazing things. And so I am just really honored to be here, and I agree with everything they said. I would just add 2 points. Certainly from an NAACP perspective, which is why you guys have me here as vice chairman of the board of directors, a few points. One, right now, as of July 1st, our community nationally, our response rate is behind due to many factors, notwithstanding COVID-19. I'd like to commend certainly Delta Sigma Theta on the focus and the work that it has going on around the census and has since the process opened, and certainly the Albany alumni chapter, who I also know has been doing work in this space. Overall, the return rate thus far, as of once again July 1st, was 61.9%. Here in New York State, the return rate is only at 57.3%. So we are currently under count, but there's still time in which to get this done. As President Dukes said, you know, it's 10 questions that takes, you know, less than 10 minutes, more like 3 to 5. And it will determine our community's future for the next 10 years. We all know that due to COVID-19, that there has been just a fiscal fallout that has shown cuts in government programs across the board. and it makes our participation in the census even more important. Here in New York, for each person that does not get counted, it will cost over $3,000 per person, funds that could be used for education, housing, transportation, healthcare services, those things that our communities desperately need. And so we cannot talk about the census enough. There is, it's easy to do, but going online, but it's really something that we have to continue to bang the drum on this because it is that important.
Thank you for that. We appreciate that. So next, we'll move to our next question. Our theme today is eliminating racial disparities and breaking down systemic racism, turning words into action. Now, when we think about that theme and the power that it holds, we know as a community that there's disparities throughout almost every facet that we could speak about, right? Education, the criminal justice system, politics, work, glass ceiling, all of these things. And I know that our time is limited and there's so many passionate topics that we could focus on. But I'd like to turn your direction to our registered voters. Those who are registered but are not exercising their right to vote because of various reasons. But some things that I've heard most importantly is what happened in our last presidential election and how it soured some of our members of our communities. And now we're saying that our vote doesn't matter, our vote doesn't count. How do we engage these people, remobilize them, re-energize them, to let them know that their voices are important? I'll come back to you, Mrs. Arline Bradley.
Sorry, okay, here we go. So, this conversation around what's important, it's not a linear discussion, right? We really have to think through all the nuances of voting, of civic engagement in general. I would say our generations are in a very interesting place. We are living in a time where about 5 full generations are actively in working spaces, in civic engagement spaces. You're talking to Hazel Dukes, Karen Boykin-Towns, and Shavon Arline Bradley, who have seen some of the most vicious times of our country, to another generation, to my generation, right? So you have this conversation that's really growing. I'm at the end of Gen X into the beginning of millennial, and even my generation, I kind of caused the sandwich because we've been taught how to ensure that our baby boomers and our war babies are how they operate and how they work. But also we've been able to kind of translate some of the conversations for the millennials and the Zs. The real question in understanding this is, how do we nuance these messages for young people who grew up thinking that Barack Obama was a standard, right? This is really what we're asking. We're asking generations who have no context for this idea of civil rights per se, who have been raised to have access to certain things that many of my parents and grandparents never had access to. The kind of uprising that we're seeing in our country right now, though, has allowed for a discussion to open up further. And this is why you see what you see happening across the country. The Trayvon Martin case I thought was going to be the case, but I will tell you that this George Floyd case, this Ahmaud Arbery, this Breonna Taylor kind of build up has changed and shifted this movement and these young people in a way that I've not even seen. And so what I would say to all of us that are doing this work, this is about how we message this work. Civil rights work has never been more relevant than even now. The difference are being open to the methods. The methods that we use in civil rights advocacy, some have changed, some have just evolved. And when I say change, I mean social media. When I say evolve, we're marching, but we're marching differently. We have different access points. Mom Dukes marched. I already know that. I've been with her to marches, but she marched before Karen and I were even born, right? So this is the context that we're talking about. But my 6-year-old now understands Black Lives Matter. How do I raise my fist? And they'll tell you, all I have to say is no justice, no peace, Mom, because I'm teaching this young person how to engage and know that his voice means something. So this idea of intergenerational engagement, of voting, is all connected to the way we message. I want to close with one thing. This Barack Obama phenomenon has been the biggest, I'd say, challenge for people that are dealing with voting right now, particularly young people, because Barack Obama is not the hook for young people anymore. That is not the place where we need to engage and push civic engagement. We need to talk about those issues that matter to young people. How do I stay safe from police officers? How do my student loans become a scratch and remove as far as I'm concerned, right? How do I create opportunities for healthcare for me and my family? Where am I going to get access to the appropriate finances to actually go to college? So we have to begin to change and nuance these messages in a way that young people can understand, and also our senior saints and our vets in this movement can also translate. We will win equity fights, civil rights fights, when all 5 generations, I call it hear and huddle. Hear each other's context and huddle on the best plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradley. That was powerful. I think that's a great transition into my next question, which I'd like to pose to Dr. Dukes. Hearing that impassioned message about what we need to do as a generation, and gleaning from your experience of being one of the pioneers of the civil rights movement, what can we glean as maybe from a historical perspective? What are we doing wrong in this generation per se, right? The civil rights movement, to a certain extent, was very successful. There's legislation passed. We got a semblance of equality. Integration happened. And now people are mobilizing, and it's starting to replicate what we've seen in the past. We're marching, we're talking, we're starting to coordinate. But what I feel is that the racists and the bigots have gotten progressive in their hatred towards people of color, whereas people of color had a couple of wins and got a little complacent. What can we do? What should we be doing?
I think Shavon laid it out. I'm here just gleaning from what she said. Let me tell you, NAACP had an old man that came on the campus of Alabama State Teachers College. And I think I might have been like, I just had turned 18. And he said these words: "You're born into politics. Someone is elected or appointed, give you a birth certificate." In my generation, that's what Shavon is talking about, because my mother didn't have a doctor to deliver, a midwife. So it took time for them to get birth certificates. But in my time, it was birth certificates. In Shavon's time, in Karen's time, in your time. And then he said, when you die, there's someone appointed or elected that have to give a death certificate. That just blew me away as a youngster at 18, that somebody was in charge of me beside my parents who conceived me, that about my life. And then when I died, they still had something to do with my life. And I thought about it as a young person at that time. I think that Shavon laid it out. It's not about what's in it for you. It's about the wider conversation that we must have. And she laid it out. It's about you, your health, your college, not coming out with debt that you can't afford to marry and begin your family when you want to. I think that's the conversation, but they got to hear it all in a context of why it's important. And yes, in every generation, the 5 generations, there's been a movement that have brought us to this point. And we got to do more education. Every vote counts. The president of the United States is elected by electoral college votes. There is a popular vote that the Republican has not won, that the Democrats win, but, and this is nonpartisan, but because of the electoral college, it is disgraceful. It is disgraceful that New York State, large as it is not counted in the electoral college votes, but you let Kentucky. That's the politics of it. And that's why we gotta say to our young people, yes, protest. I'm all for it. I'm not for looting, but I'm for protest. We did it. Martin Luther King did it. He said nonviolence. We've had a march here while Shavon worked for us. We marched down Fifth Avenue. We did the assembly of the silent march with our white blouses and black skirts on. That's what they did in right after the NAACP was organized. So yes, there's been protests. These young people didn't take up protests. And when they said, well, you old people, that's not true. I walked 27 miles with the NAACP, Journey to Justice. So I don't have to march anymore, but I want you to march. But after you get through marching, I want you to march to the polls. Take those souls to the polls. That's what we got to sit and have that conversation, as Shavon said, and they must listen. They must listen because they didn't make this up. They are repeating what's been done. But what happened in Montgomery, Alabama, they didn't march just for 2 days, for 2 months. They went 365 days. They hit people in their pockets where economic development happened. This coming the 9th, we're not supposed to go out and buy anything. It's supposed to be Black Thursday. All of these things make us propel to another level. Some people still have on their inauguration dress that they wore to the first inauguration of Obama, but they didn't go out and vote the second time. They just looked at the dress that they had wore the first time. We can't do that. We must participate. If they said it's a dog catcher race, we should be voting because it might be our dog to catch.
Powerful words, Dr. Dukes. Thank you. I think that just leads us into my next question that I'd like to pose to Mrs. Towns. I need you to put your Chief Diversity Officer hat on. So we've talked about mobilizing in the streets, marching, organizing from that social justice perspective. How do we do the same in the boardroom with people who may or may not understand our messaging or our wants and our needs, or to even speak to our allies who want to be a part but are not necessarily comfortable with our dialogue? Give us some guidance in that areas, please.
Well, first, I'd like to just touch on the election piece a bit, because elections matter. And it's not just at the presidential level, the federal level, but it's at our state and local. And as Ma Duke said, for dog catcher, which just really cracked me up, but it is so true. And in this particular year, it's not just about us going out to vote ourselves. While we have to do that, it is about organizing and taking others with us. And that comes once again to the importance of the MOU that Delta Sigma Theta has with the NAACP, which we can talk more about as we go on. But as relates to sort of what's happening in corporate America and what we're seeing externally, I've had the pleasure of talking quite a bit about this in the media. And frankly, if you're in a corporation, you've probably been called to meetings with, small groups, large groups with your CEO, with your division leader, one-on-ones with your manager, where people are checking in to find out how you're doing. And the good news and what I am hearing is that we are speaking up. As we all know, we enter in these buildings and we have these masks that we put on to kind of, not talk about or share the things that we're experiencing personally as we go about our day. And what has happened is that as they have, indicated they wanted to hear, they have been hearing a lot of things that have shocked them or supposedly shocked them. And I think that while we got a lot of, in the early days after George Floyd's murder, we, got a lot of promises and pledges and donations, that phase has really subsided a bit. And now it's about the work. And we want to see less outrage by companies and more action. And at the end of the day, they are having conversations about, diversifying their board of directors. So looking at, those who sit on their boards, many times they're not diverse at all, or very, very little. If so, what their C-suites looks like, what their recruiting policies are, what their retention policies are, how they are going to increase supplier diversity for Black vendors, how they are going to really make this something that is more than just a talking point. And what we need to be looking for, quite frankly, is in 6 months, come September, October, really checking back in on these companies that made these pledges and promises, to really look at where are they in terms of the plans, their internal plans, to really make change. And whether this is a moment or a movement will be determined by us and how active we are in our companies and in the streets, in the halls of power, because frankly, they are hoping that once this goes off the front pages, that we too will, move on. And I'm optimistic that this time is different. And frankly, when you look out and see the protests that are happening, it is really, really encouraging, because our young people have really stepped up. You see a lot of young people in the streets, and what we know is that no major social movement has happened where young people were not a part of it. And it's important that we embrace all the organizations that are working like this. So, the NAACP is the oldest and the largest civil rights organization, established in 1909, but by itself, it cannot get the work done that needs to be done. That's why you need a NAN, you need a National Urban League, you need an Until Freedom, you need a Black Lives Matter, you need a Color of Change, you need the sororities and the fraternities, and it is by us all working together. Our president likes to say civil rights is not about a competition. And so we have to really tie our ropes together in which to be able to pull in the same direction, because we're all working towards the same goal, and we will achieve that goal by working together.
Thank you for that. And we just got a question. We will take questions at the conclusion of this presentation. You can just put them in the chat. We will get to as many as we can. And yes, this phenomenal moment, never to be relived again, is being recorded for us to come back and be able to just sit. You might be missing some of the jewels that are being dispelled, but you can come back and listen to it again and get it in your spirit and get excited about the work that you could be doing and helping us to support. And in that same vein that Mrs. Boykin-Towns was just speaking about, the next question I'd like to pose to Dr. Dukes is, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Towns to weigh in again, and I'm going to have Mrs. Bradley just finish it out for us, because as we're talking about great change, just recently, a major initiative was passed that Soror Dukes was profound in leading, which was the repeal of Section 50A. And for those of you who are not aware, Section 58 of the New York State Civil Code prohibited the release of all personnel records used to evaluate performance of police officers without permissions from an officer of the court or a judge. And so I want you to be able to tell us about how important this is, but also for people who are angry and hurt and scared and terrified and dealing with law enforcement. How does this great piece of legislation being repealed, the great repeal of the legislation, help us to solidify our thoughts, actions, and movement so that we can begin to maybe achieve a level of comfort, but work more effectively with our law enforcement agencies while holding the bad ones accountable? Dr. Dukes?
Absolutely, and you said it earlier, not all cops are bad. And from our perspective as African American, we have members of our family. We have husbands, we have wives, we have nieces, nephews, working in the police department. What we do have is some bad apples, and they should not stay in there. That is not their calling. Same things that we have for teachers, for doctors. Everybody have a disciplinary code. And even in work, I worked in government. Yes, I had unions, but if you document that a person was always late, a person did not abide by the rules that your company or whatever had, that should be the same for everything. Because you put on a blue uniform and say you swear to uphold the law, and then you break the law, and then we can't find out about it. We have found out the several, even in Floyd case, that man, 2 of them should not have been on the force. Right. We have police can kill you in New York and go to Chicago and be on the police force. That should not be. We'd be able, if you make a misdemeanor or a felony, we ought to be able, if you continue on, to know that. And it should be disciplinary hearings. You should be removed from that position. And you shouldn't carry your pension with you. If you know, when you get fired in other jobs, they walk you out of the door, take your computer, lock, whatever you own. They give it to you and they put you out of the door. And so that was important. The New York State NAACP worked for 10 years. It was the NAACP. I don't know any other organization. The Deltas now go to Albany. But for 50-some years, the New York State NAACP has been going to Albany, calling its mobilization day, where we take our legislation, we take the issues, we look at bills that hadn't been passed. We must say that voting did change. We have a Senate now. Our assembly was always pretty decent, but it was over in the assembly, in the Senate, that we couldn't get bills passed. But God worked in mysterious ways. Not only did we change people in the seat, but we changed leadership. We have a sister girl leading us in the Senate. And so I can call her at midnight. I can call her on a Sunday and say to her, listen, leader, this is what's happening. This is what you need to know that our community is doing. And that's how we got this legislation. Yes, the governor was pushed to it. We have a powerful police union called the PBA. We have a powerful police unions all across this state. And so when we push and push, the governor had to listen. And not only did he listen that day, he made an executive order that by April 2021, every police department, village, counties, they must come up with a plan that will have advisory boards. I received a little place in New York called Ellenville, New York. She is a president of the NAACP. Her son was choked whole some 25 years ago. And they have sent her a letter. She sent me a copy that they have asked her to be on the advisory board of the Ellenville Police Department. And it was that same police department that one of the officers choked whole her son before Eric Gardner, before Trayvon Martin. So the NAACP wear this with honor and pride, that was what we did for our African-American males. But we still, and we are prepared, know your rights. When the police come up, get out of the car. Have your insurance, have your license with you. We prepared that booklet. It's been around for like 20-some years that we give out to young people. When I showed it to the New York City Police Department, I guess about 5 years ago, they were blown away. They were blown away that NAACP in this space have been there on the criminal justice issue. We're not Johnny come lately. And so we're proud that we had a repeal. It wasn't repealed overnight. 10 long years that we had to fight for it, but we also had to vote to get some changes. I want to tell you another story before I leave. in Nassau County, where I lived for 32 years, where most of our police who works in the New York City police department live. They don't live in the community with us. Another thing we got to work on, residency. Yeah, if you live here, you'll know us. You won't be afraid when our young men have on his do-rag. You will know that's a culture, that's a thing that we do. And so my Long Island region called all of her delegation on a Saturday morning. And she said to them, this meeting is not about what you think. My president, President Dukes, wanted me to ask you one question. How will you vote on the repeal? She said, because this will let us know how we should vote when it's time for us to vote for you. Do you know, I think it was 6 in that delegation, of only one, she had a real valid reason that her community that she served and represented is mostly from the police that works here in New York City, and they had been donning her day and night, calling her not to ask her to vote for the bill. But guess what? The day of the vote, Speaker spoke to her, the leader, because I spoke to the leader. I said, we got 5 votes for you. We're not bringing 6. And when she went and spoke to her that day, she voted. And so there's power in us, what we can do. And I hope the young people understand it wasn't done overnight. This work is not a microwave work. You must get up every morning and take 3 C's. You must have a commitment, a conviction, and courage to be in this fight.
Thank you. That was phenomenal. Mrs. Towns?
So just one thing she failed to say, she said she could get the leader on the phone at midnight or whatever. She can do the same with the governor, and she can do the same for the Speaker of the House, Carl Hastie. So she's being very modest. But I could not be more proud of the work of the New York State NAACP, because certainly, as she said, this has been something that has been on their legislative agenda for 10 years. And to be able to deliver, this was a huge win. And we know that the PBA, raised over $1 million to fight this fight. And year after year, they win, right? But things have changed. It's changed not just because, we have some of the best advocates going, but certainly the way in which they engage with their legislators is so important. And it just goes to show, also by working in coalition, but the NAACP has been at the forefront of it. I would just lift up going national for a bit. Certainly all police are not bad, and where there are those who get it, we need to work with them. So our president of the Minneapolis branch of the NAACP, Leslie Redmond, she speaks about their police chief, Chief Arredondo, who in light of everything that happened with the murder of George Floyd, we saw the swift action of those police officers being fired. She speaks to the work that they are doing and will be doing with the chief in that community, which is sort of ground zero to, what has really sparked this whole national and or global movement we see happening. Here in Brooklyn, where I live, we had the chief of Brooklyn North, Chief Madry, who was from the community, and he is someone that the community trusted. That doesn't mean that there are not issues, but it means that when there are issues, you're able to have the conversation. You know that they are on top of it, and we're really, really encouraged. He recently got promoted to be the head of community relations, community affairs for all of NYPD, and I pray he will be our next police commissioner, whoever our new mayor will be after the elections in 2021. But we have a Black woman as the new chief of Brooklyn North, Chief Harrison, who we've heard really good things about, and who I think we believe we will be able to continue the tradition of trying to work to really advance opportunities for us to not just have understanding, but to really also ensure that we can bring about ways in which our communities can not be over policed while we work citywide. But as it relates to federal legislation, this whole talk about police reform, and that a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, the House of Representatives passed a really comprehensive package of reforms that went over to the Senate. And then you might have seen Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who took the lead on the Senate side with Republicans of putting forth legislation. They didn't adopt, of course, all that came through from the Senate, from the House, but there are two big issues that are really key for this whole thing. It's the national database. We got to have the national database, and that gets to the issue that President Dukes talked about, where officers cannot go from having something bad happen in one state and go to another state, or go from one department, like go from NYPD to transit or something like that, and qualified immunity. Those are the two big issues I ask that we all keep an eye out for, because qualified immunity would give us the opportunity and the right to, when these bad actors act, that we would have the opportunity to sue them, to have their pensions taken, and all of those things that would happen for any other professional who went against the code of conduct for their profession. So this is really important work. The NAACP is not new to this. We are true to this, and certainly look forward to continuing this work with all of those who are interested in advancing this legislation. And I know, hearing President Dukes tonight, all of you in New York State will be definitely working to ensure that you are hand in glove with the work that we're doing here in New York.
Great, thank you for that. All right, Mrs. Bradley, go ahead and close us out on that question, please.
I don't think there's much else to add to that. What I will say is, just as you think about our sorority and the way that we advocate on issues like this, the call of Delta Sigma Theta has been for good policing and good practices should be rewarded and highlighted and replicated. Bad policing should not be. Bad policing should be held accountable. And so our national president has been very committed to ensuring that the voice of the sorority, and quite frankly of the Divine Nine in general, needs to be united in this space. The one thing that we know is that we have many members of our Divine Nine organizations who are also members of this criminal justice system, that are actually police officers, particularly Sorors, in all of our organizations, that put their lives on the line every day. And so our conversation has never been around singling out our members specifically, but really talking more about the collective system. How has the system failed Black people? I mean, we just need to be very clear about what we're saying here. And how has the system structurally been created so that police officers not only don't get training, it's more than just training, it's about investments, about the resources that are put into supporting officers to be able to understand their unconscious bias. And guess what? Just because you wear a blue suit and have Black skin does not mean that you don't have bias either. And so what we've been really calling for is clarity across the board, that the system, the criminal justice system, law enforcement system, has to be able to be held accountable, but also given the resources to be trained in this space. No one is negating the fact that it's a difficult job. No one's negating the fact that there's going to be very quick decisions that have to be made. But the challenges that we are facing are the instincts of some of our officers to apply force when it is not really the kind of space and place where they should be applying that force. So that's really the only thing I want to add to that.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was definitely very pointed, and we needed to hear that perspective as well. And so I just want to say a quick thank you to our panelists. That ends our formal discussion. So now we're just going to take some questions from our guests here today. And I would say I'll just pose them and anybody can answer, but we still want to have order. So as long as I can still see the three of you, we'll move forward. But as you talk about engagement, I think an important question that has come to us is, how can Black communities increase their political representation so that our concerns could be more appropriately addressed? And so I'll start with Soror Bradley, and then I'll go to Mrs. Towns, and then I'll end with Dr. Dukes.
So enhancing political representation is really centered around creating space for Black voices in government and in positions. And when we say political power is not just federal power. Political power is gaining insight from every sector there is. I'm talking about appointments. I'm talking about complete count committees. I'm talking about school board. I'm talking about your state representatives, your state senators. I'm ultimately federal, but I think we have a skewed thought process around Black political power. Black political power is also voting power. And I don't want to miss that nuance there. The reason why people deal with Black communities and Black women specifically is because we are the voting bloc that's going to be the most consistent. And there are, and the Latinx community right now has, by number, outnumbered African Americans in this country. But our voting bloc, our voting power, our consumer power yields some of this political power we're talking about. So this kind of calls you're seeing for Black women VPs is a real thing, right? Because we're utilizing political power. Political power means seats at the table, but also seats behind the door that are happening about that table. And this is where we have to really redefine what we call power. Because I'm gonna tell you something, the President of the United States has some power, but that power is also put into practice and also given checks and balances. That's why we have a number of branches in our government. It's the same thing across the board. And I think that we have missed the mark here. Barack Obama could not pass legislation by Barack Obama himself, and neither can Donald Trump. So this is why it's important to understand that political power is around how you barter, how you engage, who's making decisions for you and or with you, and then where is the money? Follow political power in a place and space that is across the board. Because I will tell you, Sorors and friends, political power for us at Delta Sigma Theta is creating opportunities for every seat to have a Black woman in it across this country. And I put it on record, put it on record. Black women need to sit in these seats and take over. What does that mean? That means creating opportunity to put the context of Black women's lives, experiences, and overall understanding of this country's plight against the Black community and place it at a seat where equity and inclusiveness are the priority. That is political power.
Period. To build on what Shavon has said is maybe we haven't gotten the memo because everyone else has gotten it, that we have power and we haven't utilized it to the degree that they know that we can. And that is why you see so much voter suppression happening around this country, because they know that as we get woke and we do what we know we should do and what we're trying to move our people to do, that it will impact them and it will not impact them well. And so we have got to recognize and we have got to embrace that we need to step up and say, there cannot be a purity test on whatever candidate, right? It's about having access and it is about having the power to have those conversations to make the demands in which to get what our community needs. And if we are not voting, then that is a problem. And so it is all about the power. And we saw what was able to happen in a state like Alabama in that Senate race. This is not old news, but sometimes it needs to be repeated that it was Black women who delivered that victory for Doug Jones. Period. It is Black women, the Black community, that will be the determinant of who sits at 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza after November 3rd. And so we have got to not be so concerned about, what is getting distracted by what is happening, because we have got to be focused. And we have to be focused in terms of saying that we must make sure that we are reaching out to our families and friends and telling them about the importance of their vote. We have got to be targeting those low propensity voters. That is what they're called, low propensity voters. Those are voters who are registered, but they have not come out to vote because they may be disenchanted. But now is not the time, because let me tell you, we would not have had that win of the repeal of 50A if we were focused on what happened in the past. We have got to embrace this moment, and we have got to, I love the term, and I'm going to use it next week when I'm on the national call with the Zetas, to hear and huddle, because that is how we win. And one last thing, you may have, I don't know how many of you watched the BET Awards. I think it was last Sunday, I can't count. Yeah. But when Beyonce got her award, she talked about we needed to vote like our lives depended on it. Guess what? That was the tagline that the NAACP did message testing on, and it was what we drove for the 2018 elections. And that's the elections where we had the highest number of Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians voting. And so my point is that, we are in this together. We have the tools that we need. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And before the end of this call, I will give you a website where you can go and get more information. But at the end of the day, no one does it like Delta Sigma Theta. And we working together can make sure that our voices are heard, our power is shown, and we can win. Because when we fight, we win.
And our life do depend on us voting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dukes. I mean, again, profound and succinct. Unfortunately, we are coming at time. This conversation is just too good to end, but we are certainly appreciative of our panelists who are very, very busy, who took this time out to have this dialogue with us. My president, Soror Williams, is saying, you got to come back. You got to come back and do a part 2, because we have more to say. We have more questions, and they're putting it in the chat. We got to have a part 2. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to end with your final thoughts. But I just want to say to our guests that have come on tonight, you are in a movement right now. What we have just experienced is a movement. And for nothing else, take from this, I know that you have gotten these 3 things. You are inspired, you are informed, and hopefully you are invigorated. Go and do the work that you have been called to do so that we can gain equal access for all. Black Lives Matter does not mean that no one else's lives matter. It means that we too matter after years of being told that we didn't. It is not anti-white, it is not anti-race. It is about equality and equitableness. And we encourage our partners that are not of color to join us in this fight, because until we reach a place where we can all be considered equal and as one, you will not have an equal place either. And we need to have a society that reflects something that we can be proud and we can all leave a legacy to generations to come. And so I'll just ask that our panelists give us their final remarks. We will start with Mrs. Boykin, then we'll go to Mrs. Bradley, and of course, we will end with the renowned Dr. Dukes.
Of course. But let me just say how much I really appreciate the opportunity to spend, this time with my Reds, who I love and adore, and friends. But I know some of you might be like, well, what can I do? What more can I do? And it's about volunteering. And with the NAACP, reaching out to Black voters is the name of the game that will be taking place all across the country, and encouraging them to use the power of the ballot box. We have resources that can help. And so whether it's talking points, whether it's support from your local NAACP branch, whether it is tools to make the texting easier, and providing a list of 10 low propensity voters in your community who you can reach out to, we can do that together. And it's by going to naacp.org /volunteer, and certainly signing up for the notices that we send out. But we can do this, and certainly I am more than willing to come back for part 2. And certainly look forward to the work that we will continue to do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Soror President, Soror Moderator. Thank you all for the opportunity. I just could not let this question go by because there's a question about the statement of checking Black. And I need to give context of what Soror Duke said, because what I don't want you to do is go back and say Delta Sigma Theta did not honor ethnicity. That was not what the statement was. And the conversation is really around representation. Ethnicities are now actually, that has been a big push in the census, to be able to allow yourselves to name any ethnicity or background that you have. So no, it's not a monolith, but it is around representation. So the diaspora in naming your Blackness and ethnicity is important to all of us. That wasn't the conversation. The conversation was making sure that you identify very clearly and specifically, because the challenge has been that persons that do not name an ethnicity or do not name a race have not been counted towards showing the true representation of the people in these areas. So I want to be on record by saying that that was the intent for that statement. And it is not a denouncement at all. As a matter of fact, there is no denouncement. In this country, there has been the name social value to your melanin. And so the idea of knowing where the value has been placed is important to us. The problem is naming Black has been a problem in spaces. The census allows that race, that name of being a Black person in this country to begin to add political context and political power and political resources. So I don't want that to be misconstrued, but I also want you to understand we're being very clear when we say check Black and check your ethnicity. Because if you don't name that, then there are going to be changes in the way that you and your community are represented. So no, it is not a denouncement. You can't denounce being Black in this country. You can't scrub that off. You can't hide that. Because at the end of the day, if this country would have been based on principles around equality and not around value based on race, then we would not be having this conversation. So if you don't check Black, if you don't check specifically your ethnicity connected to the diaspora, then you will not be represented. So my closing remarks are this: I honor the spaces that we're all in. I honor our organization for being who we are, but I'm mostly am excited about this coalition that we're seeing right now. Delta Sigma Theta, I have to speak to you this way. You are our founders' biggest dreams. They could have never thought that we would be this big, 107. You couldn't even fathom that. Because that conversation in 1913 is the same discussions we're having right now. We're in a 1913 moment, Sorors. We got to decide, do we put up or do we shut up? And at the end of the day, Delta Sigma Theta, if you are going to wear these pearls, if you're going to be who you say you're going to be, then we are calling on you, Sorors, to reignite the fire that is in the belly of our loins. And that is to be women of God, women of justice, and women of change. So Sorors, I'm so proud to call you sisters. I'm beyond proud to be Hazel Duke's daughter and Karen's sister, but I'm most grateful to God for allowing us to be connected tonight. because even in the midst of COVID, the movement still continues. So God bless you all.
Amen. Thank you so much, Shavon. And let me also give a shout out to Soror Helen Brooks for while we were trying to enjoy our barbecue, she was putting this together for us, and to Karen Boykin-Towns, who said, oh yes, we can make it happen. That's what you call a real divine nine sister. She said, you always take blue in your red. And that's true, she's shown it tonight. Let me just say, this has been a great conversation, and we must continue these conversations. Thank you so much, Shavon, for clearing the statement up that I made. And I too want to say it's no way, and I thought I said, we are denouncing no one's culture by saying being Black. Whatever that you want to use as your culture, whether you, the same thing that happened with Barack Obama, no, we don't play that. But if you remember, clearly they played a game with us on the Voting Rights Act when they tried to divide us doing racial lines. So that's why it's important for us to remember. And no one could say it better than Shavon just explained it to us. Thank you again for having this conversation. I hope our listeners, I hope they put it in your chat box and that you respond to them. And if anything that we can respond to, please reach back to us and we will help with that. It's been a great evening. I enjoyed every minute of it.
There you go.
Thank you, everyone, for thank Part 2 is coming. Helen, we got to have another barbecue. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our moderator. And everyone have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good job.